Nice.
Okay.
I have to make sure that it drops on. Yeah. Drops on.
Mine's on.
I'd been on a series of paintings probably from about 2020 until 2024, early last year. And the paintings had a lot of objects in them, and plates and spilled tea and all kinds of things in those paintings. And I decided to clean it up. I knew that it was time for something more tight, more specific, more centered, to allow the body to do all of it, instead of relying. I mean, I liked all the artifacts. I liked the suggestions that they brought, and the memories. I mean, the objects were personal to me, so it changed the way I felt about how I painted. And I wanted to infuse the painting. I put them in deliberately so that as I painted the painting, I brought emotion into the paint and into the experience. I think that's very important, because paintings are very they are not pictures, they're not images. They are artifacts, in my opinion. They are objects, like ceremonial objects. I mean, what other thing do you stroke, layer on layer, stroking for weeks and weeks and months? You know, they're ceremonial objects, really, physical objects. So I cut out all those other things, brought it down to the figures. This is my model, Andrea Harper, the American writer, and her sister, and so greatly simplified. I suppose the only object in the painting is this hat, the hat of a beguine, a lay Catholic nun, and nothing else. And the painting is square, nothing dynamic about a square. It's solid and reliable, but has no difference in its proportions from one side to the other. So it's just overly resolved. But so within the painting, it's all diagonals. It's all dynamic within the painting, because the painting itself, the physical object, is too resolved. Yeah, yeah. You know, we see art so much on phones and computers. And I think it's a big mistake. I mean, would you rather have a girlfriend or a picture of a girl? You know, and it's that, I think, all those images, they are in a way nothing. The physical object, being in the presence of the physical object, the canvas that has soaked up the sounds, the smells of cooking, the smells of, in my case, the fields and the sheep and everything that had been soaked in. You know, you look at a Van Gogh painting and I'm sure you can smell the absinthe on the countryside of Arles and the sounds of him raging around his little room, and yeah, it's all in the canvas. The way I build them is I take the photographs, I take them in that way where I'm not in the room, the model is distracted, they're really not in a photo shoot. And so I build the actual finished painting from those photographs. And the composition is very critical because I use Pythagoras. So the armature of the rectangle, things are moved until they are precisely in harmony, exactly, literally to a millimeter. They are in line with the power lines and power points of Pythagoras. so 2,500 years old. And all Western music is founded on exactly the same proportions. So I do that, and I assemble it and move those photographs until I like it. And so inevitably I wind up with a montage, because I want to move the hands until they are speaking to the armature. And I wind up with things like this, which usually I overpaint and correct until it speaks as a realistic image. But in this case, I liked it so much. I liked the division because I was already simplifying the paintings, cutting out a lot of objects, personal objects, and simplifying down to the human beings themselves and nothing else. So already it was tightening. And then I saw this and thought, it's becoming, in a sense, more abstracted anyway, more simple and to the point. So I thought, let's leave it. But it turned out to be enormously significant, because within 9 months I'd already decided, this, I think, is the end of realism for me. I'm now moving inside the human being to ideas and thoughts and concepts, pure color, pure forms and words, from now on. So that is strangely significant. But when I started my career, I began 50 years ago, painting murals in Wales, mainly Wales, a few in England. And I painted 25 murals at that time, multi-story murals. And they were all, because they were commissions from the BBC and other organizations and companies, they were mainly about society, which suited me very well. So they were about history, society, large groups of people. And then I moved to the Caribbean, worked on a tropical island. I'd been to Israel, the Independence Day festivities in Israel, and suddenly my paintings became about small groups, actors, people on the street. That it became a little more immediate, a little more personal. By 1990, I was painting about the psychology of the family. So again, it was becoming more personal. Child psychology, family psychology. By 2000, it was about the psychology of the individual and philosophy. By 2010, I was beginning to introduce abstract forms into the paintings, and then I diverted, and it became about the individual. As in most of these paintings, the individual and mortality and vulnerability. So finally, you have just what we are and our mortality. So you can see the trajectory all the way from the beginning. Society, the family, the individual, finally the face and mortality. And there's only one more place to go after that, and that is to enter the face, to enter the mind, and to make the paintings about thoughts, concepts, ideas, feelings, pure abstraction. So it's a clear trajectory, but here is the thing about it. None of it was planned. There was never a scheme, I didn't write down everywhere, by the end of next year I should be painting this, not at all. It was purely that as the years rolled by, every so often I said, I just can't do this anymore, it needs to move, and what I really feel right now is this, and the paintings moved on. No planning, and yet when you look back at the big picture, It's a perfectly clear trajectory. Surprising. You wouldn't have thought. It's not a meaning that could be expressed in words exactly. It's more of a feeling. And also, I think that artists often greatly misunderstand the concept of meaning, that essentially the entire universe is meaningless, and that the function of the human being is to bring meaning, to find meaning. You know, all the meaning is brought by us. So the artist may find a meaning in his own painting, her own painting, but of course the viewer brings an entirely different interpretation, entirely different meaning, which is of course totally valid. Paintings are not a campaign or a message. You know, that's the remit of literature, politics, you know, so forth. Yeah, I'm not even interested in my own literal meaning of it. Yeah, fascinating.
I'm good to cut there.